All right, so let's dive right in. Today, we're going to untangle military strategy, kind of peek into the world of international relations, and see how technology, especially these drones, are changing the battlefield.
Lots to unpack, for sure.
Definitely a lot to cover. One thing that keeps popping up is this whole operational space idea.
Yeah, operational space is a biggie in military thinking. Like, it's that point when an attack breaks through, they punch a hole in the enemy's defenses.
So it's open season. They can just advance rapidly.
Basically, yeah. Wide open space. It's like the holy grail for commanders. Always has been.
So it's not just pushing forward, it's about creating that gap where you can exploit the momentum.
Right, right. You need that open ground to make the most of the attack.
Can you give us some historical examples of where this operational space has led to big wins?
Oh, tons. The classic one is the Germans in France, 1941. Some units were moving so fast, it was basically as fast as their vehicles could go. Yeah, no kidding. The path ahead was clear. Enemy lines were shattered. They were racing across France.
Like a blitzkrieg, fueled by operational space.
Exactly. That speed, that rapid advance, it can crush the enemy's morale. Leads to quick, decisive victories.
Makes sense. But looking at Ukraine, particularly the Donbass, it doesn't seem like that kind of breakthrough is happening.
No, not really. Donbass is a tough nut to crack. It's super densely populated, lots of urban areas, heavily fortified industrial zones, too.
Oh, so every town, every factory becomes a fortress.
Pretty much, yeah. The retreating force digs in everywhere. Imagine trying to advance through a maze, but every corner you turn, there's another fortified position.
So it's a grind. Slow going.
Absolutely. And that actually helps the defenders, gives them time to dig in, set up new lines, make every inch of territory cost the attackers dearly.
War of attrition, then.
Yep, wearing down the enemy's resources, their willpower, just a brutal slog.
And that brings us to the whole challenge of negotiating peace in the middle of all this. It seems like you need a ceasefire before any real talks can happen.
You usually do, yeah. If you look at, say, the Minsk agreements or the withdrawals from Afghanistan and Vietnam, those negotiations happen when things were relatively stable.
So there were lines drawn, the fighting had paused, It was more focused.
Yeah, exactly. It allowed for those more, productive talks.
But in Ukraine, with these constant, even if slow territorial changes, it's like the ground is shifting under everyone's feet.
It is. It's a really fluid situation. Makes it unpredictable for diplomacy.
Every village captured, every inch lost, it all changes the power dynamic. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. Finding common ground, literally and figuratively, gets way harder.
And then you add in personalities like Putin and Trump, and they're completely different approaches to conflict. They're practically speaking different languages.
It's true. They do see things very differently.
There's this analogy going around, the cat and dog analogy. It's about their communication styles and how they size each other up.
Right. That gets at the heart of it, their worldviews.
Putin seems to be all about threats. Historical stuff, feeling surrounded, that kind of thing.
Yeah, he's very strategic, thinking in terms of geopolitics, like a chess game.
Whereas Trump, he comes at it like a business deal, right? It's all economic pressure, sanctions, leverage.
Yeah, like he's trying to force concessions.
So you have Putin playing chess and Trump playing poker. How do you even negotiate like that? What would a solution look like?
That's the big question. Maybe their opposite styles somehow find a balance.
Maybe, but...
Like Putin's worried about security. Maybe concrete agreements, concessions, guarantees address that.
And Trump, he might offer sanctions relief if Putin does what he wants.
It's possible.
But what if they just completely misunderstand each other?
That's a real risk. If Putin takes Trump's economic threats as weakness or disrespect, things could go south fast.
So much depends on reading each other's signals correctly. It's a high-stakes game. And speaking of reading signals, we can't ignore Trump coming back on the scene. His new executive order, the Iron Dome thing, focused on missile defense. Yeah, it sounds a lot like Reagan's Star Wars.
Oh, it definitely has echoes of that era. The space-based sensors, early interception, advanced basing systems.
Makes you wonder what he's really aiming for.
Right. Is it deterrence? Is he setting the stage for negotiations, projecting strength?
Or maybe he's trying to bait Russia into a new arms race, like back in the Cold War.
It's possible. And we know what Star Wars did to the Soviet Union, stretched them thin trying to keep up, which some say led to their collapse.
Could this Iron Dome do something similar to Russia, especially with their economy already strained?
It's a real possibility. The conflict in Ukraine, the Western sanctions, it's all taking a toll. A new arms race, especially one that's expensive, space-focused, it could push them further.
So even if it's not a knockout blow like Star Wars,
Yeah.
it could still make things a lot more tense, more complicated internationally. Let's shift gears a bit. Another area where old ways are clashing with new realities is this whole inclusivity debate in the U.S. military.
Yeah, another Trump reversal there. He rolled back those policies aimed at boosting minority and women representation in combat roles.
So no more quotas, no more diversity programs.
Exactly. But this whole effort has a long history, going all the way back to Vietnam.
Right. Back then, you had way more minorities in combat units than anywhere else.
It sparked a big push for fairer policies, which eventually led to including women in various combat roles. Though, of course, that wasn't easy.
Lots of pushback, right?
Oh, yeah. Concerns about physical standards, unit cohesion, even resistance within the ranks. Putting women in special forces, the Navy, it all sparked huge debates.
Shows you, progress is never a straight line.
Yeah.
Especially in an institution like the military, so steeped in tradition.
Right. It's constant adapting, negotiating, trying to balance the old ways with the changing world.
It makes you think, how do these policies impact effectiveness?
Yeah. Do they help or hurt the mission? Do they build a stronger fighting force or create new problems? It's complicated. Lots of strong opinions on both sides.
For sure. It's a debate that's not going away anytime soon. And it's going to keep shaping militaries around the world. Now, let's look at where technology is really shaking things up. Tank warfare.
Ah, yes. That's where you see drone technology changing the whole game. Those classic images of tanks rolling across the battlefield, they're being challenged by these swarms of little deadly drones.
Like, are we witnessing the end of the tank as we know it?
It's a question a lot of people are asking. Those drones, especially the cheap and effective FPV drones, they expose a weakness in tank design.
For those who don't know, what's an FPV drone?
FPV stands for first-person view, so the operator sees what the drone sees, usually through a headset. They're way smaller and cheaper than those big military drones you see on the news.
And they're deadly.
Oh, yeah. Super agile, incredibly precise.
Almost like playing a video game, but with real-world consequences.
You got it. That's what makes them so effective. Recon, targeting, even carrying small explosives. And because they're cheap and easy to use, you can deploy tons of them.
It's classic David and Goliath, but with a tech twist.
Right. And it's forcing everyone to rethink what tanks are even for on a modern battlefield.
Because those old design principles, the thick armor, the big guns, they don't matter as much against these small, agile drones.
Not as much, no.
Like mosquitoes attacking an elephant, no matter how thick the skin, you can only take so many bites.
That's a good analogy. And even those fancy countermeasures like active protection systems, they have their limits.
So they're not a silver bullet?
Nope. They're expensive, complex, and not always effective against those low-flying FPV drones.
So the future of tanks is less about brute force, more about being nimble and adaptable.
Exactly. The tanks of the future got to be more like predators, you know? Quick, adaptable, able to handle these drone threats.
And that brings us to the new European Tank of the Future project, which seems kind of stuck in the old ways.
It's been getting criticized, yeah. Too expensive, too complex, and likely vulnerable to those same drone attacks.
I like they're trying to build a better horse-drawn carriage while everyone else is driving cars.
Pretty much. They're missing the point that in this kind of fast-paced, unpredictable environment, sometimes being versatile and resilient is more valuable than just raw power.
It's about working smarter, not harder. And in the age of drones, that means thinking differently, embracing those unconventional solutions that can outmaneuver the enemy.
You got it. And this leads to a fascinating aspect we haven't touched on yet, the relationship between military and political power. How much sway do politicians have on battlefield tactics, and how much are military goals shaped by those bigger political aims?
It's kind of like a chicken and egg thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Military leaders advise on how to achieve goals, but politicians have their own agendas, right? Domestic pressure, alliances, ambitions.
So you have the general who wants to win at all costs, and the politician worried about the flat-out back home.
That's the classic dynamic. And you see it playing out right now in Ukraine. This conflict is tangled up with geopolitics, history, and the leaders' personal ambitions.
It's a reminder that war is never just about military objectives. It's always about power, influence, and those competing interests. It's like watching a chess match where you can see the players' emotions, their strategies, their doubts, all on the board. Understanding those personalities, those motivations, adds a whole other layer.
It does. It makes it so much more complex. And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not just about tactics or technology. It's about grappling with the human element, the politics, the consequences for the whole world.
These aren't just battles on maps. They impact millions of lives.
Exactly. And that's why it's important to engage with these topics, learn from history, and understand the forces shaping our world.
We've definitely covered a lot of ground in this first part, from operational space to this whole evolution of tank warfare.
We've explored how tricky it is to negotiate peace during conflict, the different ways Putin and Trump see the world, and the disruptive power of technology on the battlefield.
But we're just getting started. In part 2, we'll dig into the ethics of drone technology, what the future of global security might look like, and what role traditional military power even has in a world that's being reshaped by tech.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Before we jump ahead, there's another piece of this tech transformation that's really important, especially when we're talking about tanks and their future.
Oh, what's that?
It's this thing called active protection systems, or APS for short. Basically, they're like defense mechanisms for tanks meant to protect them from stuff like anti-tank missiles and rockets.
So like a high-tech shield deflecting incoming projectiles.
Yeah, kinda. Systems like the trophy system, that's Israel's or Russia's Afghanet, they use radars and sensors to spot incoming threats, and then they deploy countermeasures to take them out.
Wow, that sounds super advanced. So does that mean tanks could just shrug off these drone attacks now?
Well, not exactly. APS is good against certain threats, but those agile, low-flying FPV drones we talked about, they're still a problem.
So even with these fancy shields, the drones are still a big threat.
Yeah, they are. It's all about speed and maneuverability. Those drones can come from anywhere, which makes them tough to counter with traditional APS.
So we're in this tech arms race then. Drones getting better, defense is trying to keep up.
Pretty much, yeah. It's a constant back and forth. Everyone's trying to outsmart the other guy.
Makes you think, what's the battlefield going to look like in the future? Will it be all drones, or will something new come along to counter them?
That's the big question, isn't it? Warfare is definitely changing in a big way, and we're just starting to see what these advancements really mean.
It's not just tanks and drones, though, right? There's also AI, artificial intelligence. That's got to be changing things, too.
Oh, absolutely. AI is a total game changer. It's being used in all sorts of military systems now, from autonomous drones to algorithms that can, predict what's going to happen on the battlefield.
It's like something straight out of sci-fi, but it's happening right now.
It is, and it raises those big questions about the role of humans in war, Are we headed towards a future where machines are making life or death decisions?
That's kind of scary to think about.
Yeah.
What are the ethical implications of giving machines that kind of power?
They're huge. What about accountability? If an AI weapon malfunctions or makes a bad call, who's to blame? The programmer, the commander, or the machine itself?
That's a legal and moral nightmare. And can machines even understand war? I mean, human behavior, the difference between a soldier and a civilian, it's complicated.
Right. War is unpredictable, and it often comes down to tough judgment calls with limited information. Can we really trust machines to make those calls, especially when lives are on the line?
It feels like we're opening a can of worms we might not be able to close. Once those AI weapons are out there, there's no going back.
There's a growing movement to ban autonomous weapons completely, saying it's just crossing a line.
Yeah, I get that. It feels wrong, giving machines the power to decide who lives and who dies. No human oversight, no accountability.
It goes against our basic morals, right?
Yeah.
It makes you think about warfare spiraling out of control, driven by algorithms with no empathy.
We're playing with fire, and we might not be able to put it out once it starts. And it's not just the ethics, right? What about those unintended consequences? Could AI systems make mistakes, misinterpret things, and actually make conflicts worse?
That's a big worry. AI is only as good as the data it learns from, and there's always a chance for bias or errors in those algorithms.
So a tiny miscalculation by an AI system could have huge consequences on the battlefield.
Exactly. And then there's the risk of this tech falling into the wrong hands. Rogue states, terrorists, hackers, they could use these systems for bad stuff.
It's scary to think about. Technology can do so much good, but it comes with a lot of risk and a lot of responsibility.
Absolutely. We need to be having these discussions now as a global society before it's too late. We need rules, guidelines for AI in warfare, and we need to make sure there's always a human in control.
It's not just up to governments and military leaders either. We all have a role to play.
That's right. We need to demand transparency, accountability from the people developing these technologies. We need to talk about the ethical side of things and push for responsible innovation.
Because at the end of the day, technology is just a tool. It can be used for good or bad. We get to decide what kind of future we want.
Well said. Now let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger geopolitical picture. We've talked a lot about technology, but the political landscape is just as dynamic and unpredictable.
It's like a giant game of Risk, with alliances changing all the time and new players popping up, all fighting for power.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just the usual suspects anymore, like the US, Russia, China. We're seeing regional powers like India, Brazil, Turkey stepping onto the world stage.
It's becoming a multipolar world, which makes things even more complex. It's harder to figure out how conflicts will unfold and who will side with whom.
For sure. And it's not just about military strength anymore. Economic clout, tech, even culture, all those things matter more now.
It feels like the rules of the game are changing, and the old ways don't work as well.
You're right. To navigate this new world, you got to understand more than just military stuff. You got to understand political motivations, economic interests, cultural values.
It's like solving a puzzle. You got to look at all the pieces, not just the obvious ones.
Exactly. And that brings us to something really important: history and culture. They're key to understanding what's happening today.
We can't just look at things in isolation.
Yeah.
We got to understand the backstory, the old grudges, the cultural differences that fuel these conflicts.
It's like a family feud that's been going on forever. Every new thing that happens just makes it worse.
And that's why things like diplomacy, communication, being willing to see things from other perspectives, that's all so important in this messy world of international relations.
It is. But as we've seen lately, diplomacy isn't always the priority. Sometimes it feels like it's all about military threats, sanctions, and pushing things to the brink.
It's a dangerous game to play. It could easily blow up into something much worse.
Especially now, with nuclear weapons still a threat and cyber warfare that can shut down entire countries without a single shot fired.
It feels like the stakes have never been higher, and there's so little room for mistakes.
It does, and that's why we need strong international institutions, clear communication, and a real commitment to dialogue and diplomacy.
We got to find ways to cool things down, build trust, and work together to find solutions.
Because in the end, global security is something we all share. No country can ignore the problems we face, things like climate change, pandemics, terrorism.
We're all connected. What happens in one place affects everyone. The only way to build a safer world is to work together, Build bridges, not walls. Recognize that we're all human.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And that wraps up part 2 of our deep dive.
So we've really gone deep on how tech is changing the game, both on the battlefield and in the global power struggle.
Yeah, from those Donbass trenches to AI taking over, and even how Putin and Trump, size each other up.
As we wrap this up, I'm left wondering, what does this all mean for global security in the future?
It's the question, right? Things are moving so fast, it's tough to say what tomorrow's battles will even look like. But one thing's for sure. Those old rules, they're out of here.
It's all blurring together now.
Yep.
Regular war, cyber warfare, that information battle.
Exactly. And with all this advanced tech everywhere, things could escalate so fast, it's kind of scary.
No kidding. So what can we even do? How do we make the world more stable, safer?
$1,000,000 question, no easy answers. But there are some things we got to focus on.
Like what? I'm all ears.
First off, those international institutions, the rules we've all agreed on, we got to make them stronger.
You mean the UN, treaties, those ethical guidelines for tech?
That's the stuff. They're the framework, right? For talking, for diplomacy, for working things out.
Even if they're not perfect, they give us some kind of order in all this chaos.
Right. Like rules of the game, even if people cheat sometimes. But those rules got to keep up with how war and tech are changing.
Makes sense. Anything else?
Big one. More diplomacy, preventing conflicts before they blow up.
Get to the root of the problem before things get violent.
Exactly. That means boosting economies, tackling inequality, helping different cultures understand each other.
Like putting out a fire before the whole forest burns down.
Exactly. But that takes long-term thinking, being willing to put in the work, building those relationships so things don't escalate.
Okay, so what about military power itself? Does that still matter in this new world?
It does, but it's different now. It's not just tanks and bombs anymore. It's cyber, intelligence, even controlling the story, the information people see.
So brains over brawn.
Kinda, yeah. It's about smart strategies, sophisticated tools, being able to operate in this complex world where the lines between war and peace are blurry.
It's a lot to think about, but it feels like we're at a turning point. The choices we make now will determine what happens to global security.
I agree. High stakes for sure. But there's also hope. We have the smarts, the tools, the resources to make the world better. It all comes down to making the right choices.
Like we're steering a ship through uncharted waters. Don't know what's ahead, but we're the ones at the helm.
Great way to put it. So, as we close out this deep dive, some final thoughts.
Yeah, what's on your mind?
The world's changing faster than ever. Technology, globalization, power shifts. It's challenging, but it's also full of opportunity. We all got to stay informed, talk about this stuff, fight for the future we want.
Couldn't agree more. We've gone deep on some tough topics, but hopefully people come away understanding what's happening and feeling like they can actually do something about it.
Maybe we don't have all the answers, but by talking, challenging our own ideas, working together, we can get through these crazy times and build a world that's more peaceful and just.
So there you have it. We went from the front lines to AI gone rogue and saw how the balance of power is shifting.
Fascinating stuff. Hope everyone found it useful.
And this is just the beginning. Keep exploring these ideas, question everything, and listen to different points of view.
Because in this world where we're all connected, we all have a part to play in making a better future.
Thanks for diving in with us, folks. Catch you next time.
Subscribe to our podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear.